All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So far, these NBA playoffs have been on point, and I believe that we are in for a barn burner in the Western Conference Finals. This is the first trip to the Western Conference Finals for the Minnesota Timberwolves in 20 years, while this is the second trip for the Dallas Mavericks in the last 3 years. Now, we all know Ant Man and the Timberwolves have been on a roll. Okay, they swept the Phoenix Suns in round number one, and then they just came back from a 3-2 deficit to knock off the defending NBA champion Denver Nuggets in the second round. The defense of the Timberwolves is real. They allowed the fewest points per game during the regular season in the NBA. And so far in these playoffs, they are holding their opponents under 100 points per game. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know, you better know. And that is Anthony Edwards is here and he's the real deal. I know that people have talked about him potentially being the next face of the league. And this young man has the it factor. He checks all of the boxes. And I say it because it's not just about what he does at the offensive end of the floor, it's also what he contributes at the defensive end of the floor. He's a solid perimeter defender. He plays with a chip on his shoulder. And like I said before, this young man just simply has that it factor. For Carl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, I think this combination, they were able to climb a big hurdle, okay, and being able to help this team get past the Nuggets. And I'm going to touch on them like in a little bit. But then, the Mike Conley factor, a veteran ball handler, a guy that he knows the ins and outs of this game. And there's a lot of people who are pulling for him at this point as one of the sentimental favorites to try to go out there and win a championship. You got a lot of size, you got a lot of depth from this Timberwolves team with the likes of Jaden McDaniels and Nas Reed. And I think that's going to be important in this series. Um, you talk about the star power, and there's going to be plenty of it on display in this series. You think about, and I called them this early, and I'm going to stick with this the two-man power trip for the Dallas Mavericks. And of course, I'm talking about Luka Doncic and, of course, Kyrie Irving. And you just think about what they have meant to each other with this team. Of course, last season, Kyrie was acquired during a late season trade with the Brooklyn Nets, and the chemistry just wasn't there. They've had an off season together, they've had a training camp together, they've had a full season together under their belts, and Luca and Kyrie are simply just meshing. And it's one of those where I do believe if you asked one to finish the other one's sentences, I think they could do that. It was a tremendous job by this Mavericks front office to put the guys around Luca and Kyrie that could feed off of them, and they have guys that don't need a play call for them in order to be effective. And they're going to have to be important in this series. The likes of PJ Washington, the likes of Derrick Jones Jr., the likes of Daniel Gafford, the likes of Derek Lively as well. They all have to have a big time series if the Mavericks are going to get to the NBA Finals since they last won it back in 2011. You look at this series, it's going to come down to several key things. Number one, which team is going to do a better job of protecting the rim? And I think, defensively, Rudy Gobert has the potential to have a bigger impact on this series. Why? Because you don't have to worry about a guy like the Joker in this series. And I say this because the Mavericks don't have a big man who can score like Nikola Jokic. Okay, so that's something where Rudy Gobert and Carl Anthony Towns, they had their hands full against Minnesota. Pardon me, against Denver with that in round number two. Dallas doesn't bring that element to it. Steve, nah, listen, I definitely appreciate the kudos that you're giving me on the hat, my man. But nonetheless, I think Gobert, is going to have more of an opportunity to protect the rim, and that's going to be important when you get guys like Luka getting to the basket, when you get guys like Kyrie getting to the basket, and of course, can the Mavericks get Rudy Gobert into foul trouble, and can Rudy Gobert stay out of foul trouble? That's going to be the big thing right there. Um, Advantage Minnesota as far as their size, because they have a lot of size and they have a lot of length, especially when you bring the likes of Jaden McDaniels and Nas Reed into the conversation. And then again, having a veteran point guard like a Mike Conley, makes a difference right here. Will Anthony Edwards guard Luka in this series? That's going to be very interesting. Two of the better players in the NBA going at it. I think that's what the folks want to see. We've talked about this before with Anthony Edwards. He's up for the challenge. Okay, we saw it in round number one against Phoenix. We saw it against in round number two against Denver. This guy has that chip on his shoulder, and I think that could be big potentially for Minnesota as they are looking to get to the NBA Finals for the first time in franchise history. Jason Kidd has been there as a player. He's been there as an assistant coach, and now he's looking to lead the Dallas Mavericks there as their head coach. And then, of course, Chris Finch on the Minnesota side. And it's amazing, okay, the turnaround for the Timberwolves. And for me, I think the turnaround for the Timberwolves began at the defensive end of the floor. Okay, we've seen it all throughout this postseason run for them against Phoenix and against Denver. And if they're going to get past Dallas, it's going to have to be important there as well. I look at this series. You have some of the greatest players in the NBA participating in this series. I think it's going to be a back and forth, nip and tuck affair as far as who's going to win the Western Conference and advance to the NBA Finals. But like I said before, once you beat the champs, you have to be able to build off of that. You have to keep that momentum going. The Timberwolves just knocked out the defending champs. I know that they're flying high, but led by Anthony Edwards, I don't see them being complacent. Okay, sometimes you beat the champs, you're flying high, and you can't get it together to come back and take have that next game, have that next series. I think Minnesota is going to be up for the challenge. Like I said, I give them the size advantage, I give them the defensive advantage, and I think those are going to be two important keys in this series. And because of that, I'm going to take Minnesota to win the Western Conference Championship and advance to their first NBA Finals in franchise history. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out. Drop a line to be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. Steve Peter, as always, my big bro. Definitely appreciate the love. Definitely appreciate the support. And please do not be a stranger to this channel. And once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.